My point is that in the following of Jesus, there is going to be difficulty, right? We talked about this a little bit last night, but there are things that you can't even anticipate right now. And if I were to take a poll in the room and say, like, how many of you are so committed to Jesus that when difficult times come, you're going to remain faithful? You know, like when things are hard, you're not going to wimp out, you're not going to bow down, you're not going to cower and run away. How many of you are going to stay strong even when things get hard? Like hypothetically, we'd all probably raise our hands. Like there's not going to be in the room that's like, nah, I'm probably going to like wuss out when it comes down to it. But the reality is that hardship is going to come, and if you don't anticipate and think about now what that means and prepare for it, you will be less prepared than you want to be when those difficult times come. I don't even know what that difficulty will look like, but it's a reality both of human existence and a reality of discipleship, right? So Jesus himself says really clearly in John 16:33, he says, I've said these things to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, Jesus says, I have overcome the world. He says point blank, there are going to be times where it's hard. If you look at Matthew chapter 10, Jesus says in no uncertain terms that it is difficult for disciples. He says all men will hate you because of me. Parents will hate their kids, and kids will hate their parents, and they'll drag you in front of their magistrates, and they'll flog you, and they'll call you the devil. And Jesus goes on and on and on, right? He says it's going to be difficult. And so we anticipate the difficulty. Right now, you've been at Joshua for a year. We talked about this a little bit this morning. But this is an unrealistic existence. You have had an unrealistic year following Jesus. Even the things that are hard at Joshua are easier than the things that will be hard in a world where you're not all on the same page, chasing the same things, where you have leaders who love you and are behind you, where you're in a beautiful setting, right? The most difficult things at Joshua will pale in comparison to the difficult things that happen in regular ambassadorship, right? And I'm not trying to belittle the difficulty or the complications of being at Joshua. I know it's hard, right? I've been here. But the difficulty here is not the same as what you'll face in the regular world. And so I want you to think about discipleship as movement and what you will do in the moments where that stress or that pressure, that anxiety, that fear rear up their head. Will you run like I did on the Ponderosa deck? Or can there be a different response? And can you prepare yourself now for that different response? So Matthew 14, famous passage, right? We're going to look at a text tonight that is like it's like the most overtaught Sunday school passage ever, flannel graph, puppet show, whatever. You've all heard it before. I'm not expecting that this text will come as a surprise to any of you, but I want to try to get you to look at it with some fresh eyes here, okay? So we're starting in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. To set the context, this is just after the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus has just proved his miraculous power in a spectacular way, right? 5,000 men, not including the women and children, have just been fed out of just like a basket of fish and bread. There is no question that Jesus is capable of doing stuff better than anybody else, right? Then it says this in Matthew 14, 22. It says immediately, so after that, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. So I just want you to watch the way this thing goes down. Jesus has something, he's got a plan, like he's working a plan. Rather than saying to the disciples, hey, we got this huge crowd, 5,000 plus people that we need to disperse. I'm not feeding them anything else today. They've had enough, right? Let's get rid of them. Rather than saying, hey, each of you take a section and let's disperse the crowd, he looks at his disciples and he says, you guys get in the boat, go to the other side. I'll meet you later. I'm going to dismiss the crowd. So Jesus does this crowd control thing. He sends the disciples away without him. Now, interestingly, if you were to look at Matthew chapter 8, there's another scene where Jesus is in the boat with the disciples. You can do that on your own time. You want to go back and look at it later, you can. Matthew 8, Jesus is in the disciples with the boat, and they deal with some stress and some pressure there. But dealing with stress and pressure when Jesus is in the boat with you is a little bit different than dealing with it when he's not. He puts them in the boat and he sends them across the Sea of Galilee while he disperses the crowd. Back to Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It says, after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them, right? We see Jesus sends them away, and he sent them into a storm by themselves. Now they're in the boat, the wind is howling, the waves are crashing, and they're in a dangerous and delicate situation, right? They're in a precarious spot. They're not in this spot because they chose to be in the spot. They're in this spot because they did what Jesus told them. So maybe one of the first things I want you to see is that if your assumption is that by being obedient to Jesus, you will never end up in a storm, you have misassumed. Sometimes you'll do exactly what he says, and it will seem mundane, and it will seem like things he's told you to do 100 times before. It'll be the very same thing you've seen all your friends do, right? You'll be doing just regular, bless you, you'll be doing regular Christian stuff. But in this particular instance, obedience to Jesus will be the thing that puts you in a difficult spot. And you can't know which moment of obedience it is, right? Any moment of obedience could be the one that lands you in the storm. For them, all they do is get in the boat like Jesus told them, but he sends them into a storm. There are various reasons in our lives that we end up in storms, right? Sometimes, just for the illustration of it, sometimes you're going to end up in a storm that you're in because you've been an idiot. And I mean that in the nicest way. I don't know all of you very well, but all of us are stupid sometimes, and sometimes you do stupid stuff, and you end up in a storm in your life because you've been dumb. Does that make sense? Okay, I don't want you to feel insulted by that. I'm talking about me too, but sometimes I end up in a storm, and it's because I made a bad choice. It's the consequence of my actions, right? It is also possible in this life to end up in storms because of the consequences of other people's actions. We are communal people, and we live in community no matter what. Like, that's just how we're made. We're made to live with other people. We're not made to live in isolation. And the communities in which we find ourselves, both religious and otherwise, are full of fallible people. I've said that over and over. And because you live in community with fallible people, religious and otherwise, sometimes you'll end up in a storm, not because you were an idiot, but because your neighbor was stupid, right? Or evil, or your neighbor was selfish or prideful or gluttonous or greedy or racist or who knows what, right? Sometimes you'll end up in a storm and it wasn't your fault, but you're in community with somebody else who made a dumb choice and now you're in a storm, okay? It is also possible to end up in a storm in this life that isn't the result of your bad choices or some other person's bad choices. It's possible to end up in a storm in this life because we live in a fallen world. So now, hey, let's just take like literal storms, right? The death and destruction that come because of the brokenness of our planet with regard to things like hurricanes and tornadoes and flash floods and whatever. Like, that's not that somebody somewhere made a bad choice and all of a sudden a hurricane came. Jesus refutes that absolutely, right? When they say, like, did this bad thing happen because this guy was such a bad sinner? And Jesus is like, that's not the way that works, right? So when a hurricane comes or when a tornado comes or whatever, we don't go like, oh, that was an evil place that got hit by a tornado. We go like, we live in a broken world, right? It's a fallen world. Someday, Jesus will perfect all things. He will restore all things. And when that happens, there will not be any more death. But right now, it is possible for you to live in a storm or to be in a storm, both literal or figurative, that isn't a result of your bad choice or somebody else's bad choice, but it's a result of living in a fallen world where cancer happens, right? For instance. And if you're dealing with that, my mom died of cancer in 2020. That wasn't my mom's bad choice, and it wasn't my bad choice or anybody else's bad choice. It was the result of living in a place where cancer exists, right? There's a fourth way that storms happen, though. There's probably more. I'm going to give you 4 tonight. Your choices, somebody else's choices, fallen world. And the fourth is that sometimes God permits, or I might even say creates a storm that is put into your path as a test. Now, let me be really careful and clear here. I want to be really clear. When God gives us a test, why does He do it? Go ahead. Okay, that's a good answer, and I don't want to pick on that, but let me just ask you a follow-up question on that. Is God omniscient? So why does He need to see if you're faithful? But if He's omniscient, He already knows. I'll give you my answer. And by the way, just like everything I'm saying, I could be wrong, right? But let me tell you this. When God gives a test, He's never giving the test because He wants to learn something about you. Never. Because He's omniscient. God doesn't give a test that He doesn't know the answer to already. When God gives a test, I'll give you a literal example out of the Bible. Abraham and Isaac, right? God says to Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, to the top of the mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him there. Does God do that so that God can learn something about Abraham and Isaac? No, God already knows everything about Abraham and Isaac. What's the test for? The test is not for God to learn something about Abraham and Isaac. The test is for Abraham and Isaac to learn something about Abraham and Isaac. Does that make sense? So when God allows these storms in our lives, or sometimes creates these storms in our lives, when Jesus puts them in a boat and He sends them out into a Sea of Galilee that is stormy, that is an opportunity not for Jesus to learn something about them or for God to learn something about them, but for them to learn something about them. See, we can sit in this room together and sing our songs and pray our prayers and read our Bibles. We can do all that stuff and affirm that we have faith and that we love Jesus and that He changed our lives and that we've been redeemed and that we're, being conformed to His image and all these things. But you won't really know the reality of whether your faith is true until you're put into a crisis moment. And in that crisis moment, you will learn something about your faith. I could talk all day about how I would die for my wife, and when the bear growled, everybody found out that weren't true, right? Everybody found out when the bear growled that what Darin cared about most in that moment was saving Darin's own skin. And it doesn't mean I don't love my wife. It just meant that I didn't have what it took to stand there and protect my wife in that moment. I think I would have that courage now. I think I learned that lesson, right? I'd probably get killed by the bear because I'm not very fast. The point is, sometimes these storms come into our lives and they are a test, but they are not a test for God to learn something about you. God doesn't need to learn anything about you. He already knows everything about you. It's a test for you to learn something about you, right? For you to see the tested genuineness of your faith. Peter talks about this, by the way. If you want to and you're taking notes, you can go back and look at this in your own time. But in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 and following, Peter says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you've been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen Him, you love Him, and though you do not see Him now, you believe in Him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory." When Peter talks about the tested genuineness of your faith, he's not saying God has allowed this difficulty to come your way so that He can learn something about you. He's saying God has allowed this difficulty to happen in your life so that you can learn something about the genuineness of your faith, right? The whole reason I'm hitting this and I'm repeating it in so many different ways, I'm just reiterating the same principle over and over, is that I want you to understand before you get into the trial that there is an opportunity to learn something about you in there, in the storm, right? I asked you before we started to think about a place in your life where you feel stress or anxiety or pressure or worry or doubt or fear, where you're feeling a little bit nervous, right? There is an opportunity in the midst of that storm for you to learn something about your faith. And it's helpful to have that framework or that paradigm because discipleship is movement, because you're on a trajectory. It's helpful to be thinking now, hey, the next time I feel like I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know what's coming next, I don't know what to do, you can stop and remind yourself, in this storm, I have a chance to learn something about how I believe in God or whether I believe in God or not, right? There's something to learn about the tested genuineness of your faith there. All that to say, Jesus sends them into this storm. Now check this out, back to 24. This is Matthew 14:24. It says, the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. At this moment, what is it that the disciples are afraid of, by the way? Drowning is a good answer. What else? Death. Yeah. I mean, literally, they're scared of the waves. They're scared of the water. For what it's worth, the ancient Hebrew people, and not just the ancient Hebrew people, but ancient people of all kinds were scared of the depths of the water. That's why in the scripture we see them talk a lot about the scariness of the deep, right? So, yes. Is that, you're just agreeing with me? Oh, chaos. Okay, sorry. Yes, right. So, understand that in this particular case, yes, they're scared of drowning. Yes, they're scared of death. Yes, they're scared the boat's going to collapse. Yes, they're scared of the wind and they're scared of the waves because the water is a scary thing to them. That's what their stress moment is about. That's where their fear lies. That's what their anxiety is about. That's what would have been the source of all the drama in their hearts at this moment. Wind and waves. Death. Drowning. Okay? With that as a backdrop then, it says in verse 25, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. Okay, sub-question, just to think about. Does He need to get to the boat this way? No. Is he just showing off? Is that what this is? Like Jesus is just like, look what I can do. Suckers, right? Check it out. I can walk on the water. I'm awesome. No? What is this? What's he doing? Why does he walk on the water? Why not just, he's praying up on a mountain by himself. They're out in a boat in the middle of a storm. He's got a lot of options, right? He could have just teleported himself to the boat if he wanted to do that. He could have swam. He could have taken his own boat. He could have flown. He could have rode on a giant eagle. I don't know, name a thing. He could have done it, right? Pick a thing. Jesus riding on a unicorn if he'd wanted. Why does he do this thing? It's important. This is important. Of all the options Jesus has to get near to them, what does he do? He walks on top of something. He walks on top of the thing they're terrified of. He walks on top of the thing that is a threat. He puts his sandal soles on the surface of the thing they're scared of. They're scared of the wind and the waves, and Jesus walks on top of that. The point I'm trying to make, and I'm probably belaboring it, is that Jesus can use the thing you're anxious about as a pathway to get nearer to you. Jesus can use the thing you're scared of as a pathway to get nearer to you. There's a route here. He doesn't have to choose this. He does it to show them something. What's he showing them? That the thing they're scared of, he is more powerful than. He is more powerful than the waves. He is more powerful than the wind. And in fact, the thing they're so worried will kill them, he uses as a vehicle to arrive in closer proximity to them, right? Jesus draws near to them on the top of the waves and the storm. The thing that is the very source of their fear is also the route that Jesus intentionally chooses to take to draw nearer to them. It demonstrates his ultimate power over everything we fear, right? That he will be with us. Isaiah says in Isaiah 43:2, and he's speaking with the voice of God here, he says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. What's God saying in Isaiah? What's Jesus demonstrating in Matthew 14? That the thing you're scared of, he's more powerful than. That the thing you're worried about, he's got more power than. And not only that he's more powerful than it, but that he has the ability, through his miraculous power, to use your crisis as a hallway or a walkway to draw nearer to you. Right? Now it's interesting because he walks across the waves to them. It says in 25, in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Verse 26, but when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and they said, it is a ghost! And they cried out in fear. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Like, I think sometimes we get this idea that like the disciples were like pretty chill and cool, like they knew what was going on. But like this is one of those moments where they're just so stupid, right? And the Bible doesn't tell us anything about why they believed in ghosts, or like there's never a point where Jesus gets in the boat and is like, guys, ghosts aren't real. Like he doesn't do that thing. And so we have to look at it and go, are they? Maybe ghosts are real. Maybe the disciples knew something we don't know. Should we be scared of ghosts? Next time I go out on a boat, I'm going to be watching for ghosts, right? I don't know. There is no refutation of this particular fear. But let me tell you what I see when I look at verse 20, when I look at verse 25 and 26. They aren't watching for Jesus. They're on the lookout for something even more terrifying. Can I tell you that in my life, and I don't know what you are like, but in my own life, when I'm in the midst of anxiety and crisis and terror and fear and sadness and grief and whatever, I tend to have my radar up for more sadness. I tend to be watching for what other ugly thing's going to happen, or what other scary thing is going to happen, or what other bad thing somebody's going to say. My inclination, my natural inclination in the midst of a moment of crisis and stress is not to have my radar up for how Jesus is going to get closer to me in the middle of the stress. Does that make sense? I'm not good at this. I would do the exact same thing they would do. I would go, wait, I'm drowning in a boat in the middle of the water. What could be worse? Oh, a ghost will come and kill me. I'm going to get killed by a ghost in a boat while I'm drowning. Double bad, right? That's the way my heart works too. My heart tends to take whatever fear I already have and to expect something worse. But Joshua, can I encourage you with something? By the way, I don't know what the betting game is like tonight with me saying the Joshua Wilderness Institute, but I'm really trying to win some people some money and prizes. You know what I'm saying? I want to be the kind of person who in the midst of crisis not only believes that Jesus can step and put his sandal soles on the top of the thing I'm scared of to get closer to me, but I also want to have my radar up to be watching for how he's going to arrive in the midst of my fear, as opposed to how something scarier will arrive. Does that make sense? They're not watching for Jesus, and that's why they're startled. They're not expecting him, they're expecting the worst. Had they been watching for Jesus, this might have been a different story. But fear clouds our faith. Fear clouds our faith. Look at what happens next. Look at 27. You guys seem like you're a little sleepy tonight. It's all right. I don't blame you. You've had a long day, lots of things going on. If I can bless you with just a teensy-weensy little nap, you are very welcome. 27. They say it's a ghost. Jesus gets into the boat, 27, and immediately Jesus spoke to them. And here's the thing. He doesn't go, knuckleheads, there's no ghosts. He doesn't say, what are you guys freaking out about? This is what he says. He gets in, and the first thing he says to them is, take heart, or like be brave. Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. Guys, this is just kindness. It's just compassion. It's grace. He doesn't scold them. He doesn't give them a little Bible lesson. He doesn't remind them that they were in a boat with him like a few chapters before this. Guys, somebody's going to write this down and put it in the Bible. In chapter 8, you'll have been in a boat with me in a storm, and only just a few chapters later, you idiots are going to think you see a ghost. Like, please, you're making me look so stupid, right? He doesn't do any of that. What he does is he says, you don't need to be afraid. I'm with you. I'm here. You don't have to be afraid. It's beautiful, right? Because aren't you worried? I mean, maybe you're not. I'm worried. I'm worried that in my moments of panic and in my moments of fear, my moments of crisis, my moments of terror, moments of powerlessness, my fear is that like someone who's more spiritual than me is going to show up and be like, wish you were a better Christian. Too bad, right? Wow. You're a pastor of a church and you still get scared? Wow, you're the director of the Joshua Institute for 6 years and you still sometimes are worried about rainstorms or whatever. Like, that's my fear. My fear is to be shamed because I'm just a regular human. And one of the things I want you to get is Jesus doesn't do that. That is a thing other humans do. I can't control what other humans are going to do. But what Jesus does is extend kindness and compassion and grace. He is on brand when he gets into the boat. He says, take heart, for it is I. Do not be afraid. The next thing that happens, right? First of all, the presence of Jesus eliminates their fear. There's no reprimand, no sarcasm, no humiliation, just comfort and peace, right? And then immediately the fear is like gone. Peter says in 28, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. Like if that's the case, man, I want to walk on the water too. Let's go, right? So Jesus says, come. This is incredible faith. Here's what's funny. When you think about this story and you think about Peter walking on the water, you probably think of it as a moment of embarrassment for Peter, right? Because you know in a minute he's going to start to sink. But before he ever sinks, you guys, he rocks it, right? There's an incredible moment. Think about discipleship as movement. Discipleship is packed with these, where one moment you do something incredibly brave and incredibly courageous and incredibly faithful, and then within like 16 heartbeats, you're sinking, right? That's the Christian life. That is discipleship. It is a back and forth, moments of incredible courage and moments of incredible cowardice. Peter, in this moment, Jesus has just dispelled all of his fear, and he says, if it's you, call me to come out of the water. And Jesus is like, let's go. And Peter climbs out and he walks on the water. Amazing moment. But he gets distracted by what's happening around him. Verse 29, he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid again. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Well, he gets distracted. Here's the thing I want you to see. Not only can the storms in your life be a vehicle for Jesus to draw nearer to you, but if you'll put your eyes on Jesus, the storms in your life can also be a pathway by his power for you to draw nearer to him. That's what Peter does, right? Now they're both walking on top of the storm towards each other. And there's a beautiful picture there of what can happen in those moments of crisis in our life. Moments where things come off the rails. Jesus can walk towards you on top of that storm, And if you have faith and you put your eyes on Jesus, you can walk on top of that thing to get closer to him. But there will be all kinds of distractions. The moment that you start to do that, there'll be a lot of people saying to you, like, why are you being faithful? Why are you following God? You should be, like they say to Job, you should be cursing God, beating your chest and screaming, and no more singing of worship songs, Job. Knock it off, right? You'll have all kinds of people that will try to distract you. Peter gets out on the water, and now they're walking towards each other. They are drawing near to each other on the top of the storm. But he hears the wind, he sees the waves, and he becomes fearful again. What's he do? Well, he takes his eyes off of Jesus. He takes his eyes off of Jesus, and that might seem like a Sunday school answer, but for us disciples who are on this journey, we're growing and moving, we're never quite finished, right? It's important to remember the simple stuff, and one of the simple things is, if you've taken your eyes off of Jesus and you put them on yourself, or you've put them on me or some other Christian leader, you put your eyes on a discipleship program or whatever, guess what? The discipleship program's not going to keep you on top of the waves. It's great. I'm a big fan of the Joshua Wilderness Institute. Hume Lake, what a great place, right? Hume Lake's not going to keep you on top of the waves. Your pastor, your favorite author, your favorite theologian, your favorite religious podcaster, none of those people have the power to keep you on the top of the waves. If you get your eyes on them, you'll sink. Jesus is the only one with the power. Don't forget it. Don't forget where the power is. It's not with pastors, not with none of that, right? Jesus. Take your eyes and fix them on Jesus. And then you have the ability to draw near to him. But even in the midst of that doubt, and even in the midst of that fear, I also want you to see, and watch, this thing it's like ping pong. It's going like faith, doubt, faith, doubt. He takes his eyes off of Jesus. He starts to sink, but then he immediately corrects. What's the next thing he does? He calls out to Jesus, right? In that moment of fear, he does the next right thing, which is he cries out and says, Lord, save me, acknowledging Jesus' power and whatever. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him. Now there's this physical contact. Jesus grabs him and lifts him up out of the waves, and he says, oh, you of little faith. And by the way, I've heard this read many, many times as a shame, like as Jesus like being like, you dummy, right? That is not consistent with the heart of Jesus, and that is reading tone into a text that is not present here, right? To say, oh, you of little faith, is just the way you talk to a child. He's talking to someone who is more immature than him, right? He's talking to someone who is his disciple. And he says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? He's not making him shamed. He's not embarrassing him. He's not rebuking him. He's just saying, like, I was right here. All you had to do is keep your eyes on me. Well, why'd you look at the storm? I got the storm. That's my thing. You keep your eyes on me, right? He lifted him up. Says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. I'll be honest with you guys, I'd rather be the guy who sinks a little, reaches out for Jesus in my time of need, and recovers, than the guy who never gets out of the boat at all. I mean, I know that like in the Sunday school flannel graph or the VeggieTales or the puppet show or whatever, like I know Peter gets painted as like a guy who blew it here, but that's not what's happening. He did better than everybody else, right? So it's just like I don't know why we paint him that way, but he got out of the boat, you guys. I would rather be a guy who gets out of the boat, gets a little bit wet because of my humanity and my fallibility, but knows what I did wrong and can call out to Jesus and say, I was stupid, and Jesus picks me up. I'd rather be that guy every day, 100 out of 100, than the person who just stays safe in the boat all the time. Peter does the right thing here. Jesus saw them through it, and this was just a point on a path from A to B, right? This isn't the end of Peter's journey. It's not the end of the other disciples' journey. It's just one point, one place where Peter learned something about his faith. This storm was not the result of Peter's bad choices or Jesus' bad choices or anybody else's bad choices. I don't actually even think this storm was a result of living in a fallen world where storms just happen. I think that this was a result of God trying to give Peter an opportunity to learn something about himself. And I think he passed the test very well. I think Peter gets out of the boat on the other shore feeling different about his relationship with Jesus because he took the risk here. Everything hinges on knowing who you're with, right? I'll finish, and I really will be done here with one quick story. The scariest thing that ever happened to me in my life happened to me when I was in 4th grade. And I went to bed just like normal, regular night, kiss my parents goodnight and whatever. And then I woke up sometime later, and I didn't actually know what time it was, but I woke up sometime later very disoriented, and I realized immediately that I was no longer in my room. And I knew that because, number one, I slept with a nightlight. Don't judge me, but there was no nightlight. It was pitch black. Number two, I slept in a bed, and there was no bed. I was on a cold, hard floor, and it was pitch black. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And then I also realized that I was tied up. And so I started to panic because I realized that somebody had come and taken me out of my bed, and they had tied me up, and they had put me somewhere else where it was very dark. And so I roll up onto my hands and knees, and I start to crawl. And very quickly, I kind of bang my head into a wall, and I turn and go the other direction, and I bang my head. I'm like basically in a box. And so I start to cry and sob and scream and whatever, try to figure out where I am and what's happening to me. And the next thing I remember is like a blinding light. And as my eyes adjust to what's happening, all of a sudden I can see a bunch of things all at once. Number one, I see my mother's face. She's standing over me. And then I realize where I am. I'm on the floor in our front bathroom of our house. And she turns on the light. I realize where I am. It's tile floor. And when I had gotten up onto my hands and knees to crawl, I had basically crawled and banged my head into the bathtub, and then turned and banged my head into the door, and then banged my head into the toilet, and then banged my head into the wall. And so I thought I was in a box, but I was just in our front little bathroom. The reason I thought I was tied up is that I had gotten up in the middle of the night at some point and gone to pee, and I had taken my pajamas and my underwear down, and they were wrapped around my ankles, and so I thought I was tied up, but I wasn't tied up. I just didn't have any pants on, and so I realized all these things simultaneously, and it's a really funny emotion that I remember, because it's this moment of like, I'm not gonna die, I am safe, my mom is here, I'm in my house, my privates are out, right? Like all of that happens, like it's just like boom, boom, all that kind of is all just like stacked on top of one, right? And so I'm like scrambling to get my pants up, and also happy that I'm not dead, and I'm wiping the tears away and whatever. But all that situation needed was the light. And the moment the light shined in that situation, I knew who I was with, I knew where I was, I knew what my fear had been caused by. Everything else was reoriented, even in some cases my humiliation or like my embarrassment because of the state I was in. But all of that was preferable to being in the darkness. Does that make sense? Jesus steps into the boat in the midst of the storm, and he flips on the light. And they have the ability, and we have the ability, to know who we're with, where we're at, why we're in the circumstance we're at, and what it's going to take. It's going to take that faithful next step of obedience and the willingness to admit when we've got it wrong. If we will do this, then in the moments where the bear roars or the winds crash or we think we see a ghost, we'll have the ability to recognize that this is just a point on a trajectory like Joseph does. So now I really will be done. Joseph famously in Genesis 50, right? Did you guys talk about Joseph this year sometime? Good. Joseph is a guy who gets this as good or better than anybody, but at the end of his life when his brothers are all super scared that he's going to take revenge on them, you remember what he does, right? Genesis 50, verse 19. Genesis 50, I think that's right. In Genesis 50, 19 are close there too. Joseph says to his brother, they're like, hey, don't forget, Dad said you're not supposed to be mean to us. Before he died, he said, make sure you tell Joseph, be very good to his brothers, because that's really what I want. No, there's no record that Jacob had actually said any of those things, but whatever. They say all this to Joseph, and Joseph says, who am I? Right? Am I God in this situation? Like, you did evil to me, but what you intended for evil, God intended for good. What we see in that is that Joseph had gone through some storms, and he had passed the test, not by understanding some things about his brothers, but by understanding some things about who he was as a result of the fact that God had shaped him in the midst of the storm. We have the ability to do that too. You might not be in a storm right now, but you'll be in a storm eventually of one kind or another, multiple storms. And my encouragement to you would be to remember That's not the end of your life. It's just one more point on this trajectory of discipleship. And the key in the midst of all of it is to remember that whatever it is you're scared of, Jesus has more power than that, and he can actually walk on the top of that thing to get closer to you and to draw you nearer to him, right? So reach out your hand to him. Let me pray for us, and we will be done. God, thanks for Peter. Thanks for the fact that he's like not a superhero. Thanks for the fact that he does some real cool stuff, and he also does some dumb stuff, and that makes me feel right at home. I pray, God, that you would help us to follow you faithfully even in the midst of storms, to recognize why these storms occur and what our options are in the middle of the storms, but to recognize that all of them, no matter how they occur, have the opportunity, like Peter says in 1 Peter, so that the tested genuineness of our faith can be made evident, not to you, but to us and to those around us, that we have the opportunity to learn something about our faith in you in the midst of those storms as you draw nearer to us and we draw nearer to you. We love you and we need you and we can't live without you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.